Hello and welcome to Tether's Human Environment podcast, where we talk about the intersection between people, the homes we live in, and the natural things that impact our health, our lifestyle, and our property. With me as co-host, Brandon Van Blerk, who is the founder and CEO of Tether, a New Zealand tech startup that works with building homeowners and occupants to solve building performance problems, improve health, reduce cost, and help create a sustainable future. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks, Colin. Nice to be here again and nice to see you on what looks like a sunny day outside.
The weather is good. Life is good. No complaints, eh? And the air is good. I mean, that's what you can tell us about.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do, make the air better. We're always improving.
Well, the air we breathe, and that's what we're talking about today. The air we breathe, new research suggests affects brain health. So what they're saying is that poor indoor air quality influences sick days. Most people know that, but it also impairs cognitive function. So the research says that the air we breathe has an influence on how we think, the speed of thought and that sort of thing. You've obviously been quite immersed in this area. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that the science has been around for some time, and it depends on how you define air. There's different components, obviously, towards air, and those different components will have different impacts on brain function or brain health. The one that's probably most understood would be the impact that carbon dioxide has on just the ability to think or stay awake. So the science says we breathe in air, that air has a certain amount of oxygen in it, and we require oxygen to survive and live. And there's also a known quantity of carbon dioxide that lives within the air naturally within fresh air. But as soon as you increase the level of carbon dioxide within a room and you decrease the ratio of oxygen in that room, you're breathing in more carbon dioxide than you are oxygen, you naturally start to become more tired. You fall asleep. And this happens in conference rooms when you have a bunch of people getting into a room, you close the door. After about an hour and a half to 2 hours, I think everybody would have experienced that boring conference nod, where you start to sort of fall asleep, and that can sometimes have something to do with the speech or what's being presented. But more often than not, it's actually about the air quality. And because there's not sufficient ventilation within the room that you're in, the carbon dioxide levels rise, and therefore your ability to gain enough oxygen decreases. And so your ability to concentrate also decreases with that. And that's prevalent in schools as well, or any real environment where there's insufficient ventilation. It can even happen in your bedroom when you're sleeping, just with yourself and your partner, if you have one. If you close the door and you don't have adequate ventilation within your bedroom, and you yourself are breathing out carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide level goes up, then it'll actually affect your night's rest, in terms of how good your quality of your sleep is. And there's a massive revolution happening at the moment just in terms of sleep science and good ventilation and temperature and humidity. Some environmental factors like that can also affect sleep quite significantly. So there's the CO2 piece, and that's quite prevalent, and we can go down that in more detail if you want. But then there's also other components to air as well. So those are things like volatile organic compounds or particulate matter or any foreign gases or foreign bodies, I guess, within the air itself. These are less prevalent than obviously CO2 because you need an environment to actually be off-gassing volatile organic compounds, or you need particulates to be coming in, whether that's from the street or from construction or from pollen or something along those lines. And those gases can be very dangerous or detrimental towards mental health, brain capacity, that sort of thing. Yeah, depending on what scale you're talking about, you can get the acute volatile organic compound or particulate matter contaminants within the air, which can affect concentration or just brain development, as well as the more prevalent CO2, which is everybody experiences pretty much on a daily basis, I'd say.
And most of us will know the conference experience, right? It's the dread of every speaker to get the after lunch slot, mostly because we think we've eaten and we're on a full stomach. But obviously, it's ventilation, and possibly hotels could take more consideration into how they ventilate a room. But you also mentioned schools, and I'm imagining universities and workplaces, anywhere where and also with everybody working from home, anywhere where people need to concentrate, and we're talking about poor indoor air quality, carbon dioxide being the big one, is an issue and needs to be improved. And Would it be fair to say that most places, most workplaces, most hotels, most schools don't even give a second thought to air quality?
Why would you, unless you know that it's a problem? This is an issue that I guess we have as humans, humanity at large. We deal with acute issues. We don't deal with systemic problems. And sometimes the science is just a little bit too all over the place, or it seems a little bit too complex to really want to apply your mind to it. And often it means spending money. Once you've built a building and you've gone through the construction process and you've designed it, it's very, very rare that you have the appetite to then go and redo things because your ventilation wasn't correct, or you haven't provided the right indoor environmental quality for your children or your employees or whatever. That's where the reluctance really sits, is once the building's built, you expect it to be healthy, but it isn't. Especially in New Zealand, this is a huge problem. The impacts are unfelt because they're soft costs, right? So if someone is spending an hour or two a day just losing concentration, not being able to do their work efficiently because they're uncomfortable within the environment, or they're just feeling tired and sleepy all the time, and your environment is attributing to that, that's lost revenue, that's lost cost, right? You are missing out on productivity by providing an environment that doesn't completely assist, I guess, your students or your workers to try and perform at their absolute best. But it's difficult to know because it's not measured, right? Well, not until companies like Tether came along. But these metrics aren't measured, and so it's difficult to understand whether you're doing a good job or not. And then also it's difficult to understand that if you do something, how that gets measured and whether what you've done actually has the return on investment or not. So what we really need is more measures. We need more data to understand what the impact is there actually a problem? If there is a problem, how do we fix it? And if we can fix it, how do we measure the return on investment of that intervention? I think that's where we're sitting, but the link is definitely there.
I mean, one of my questions I was going to ask you is, why do we have poor indoor air quality? And you've answered that to quite an extent in terms of people don't know what they don't know. There is a cost factor that is involved as well. Also, there hasn't been any way for people to measure the air quality of a room. You did say, particularly in New Zealand, and maybe we can just circle back to that and understand why New Zealand, and I would imagine there's a couple of other countries that have the issue, but why does New Zealand have this issue? Is it weather?
It's actually got to do with our building code and the environment itself. So our weather conditions are actually pretty good compared to countries like Taiwan, for example, right? We don't have huge manufacturing industries that pump, massive amounts of smog and stuff into the air. So our air is relatively clean. We do have a temperate climate, and we do have issues with humidity and things that we have to deal with. But it's mainly got to do with our building code, right? When we build houses or buildings, they're not necessarily built to the right standard. They can be if they follow a higher degree of, I guess, a higher standard than the building code, which can be seen in green stars and home stars and passive houses and different types of standards that are now being followed. But the standard building code is just not good enough. And I know we're now going through a review, which I think should be coming out in the next few days, as far as I'm aware, which may look at how the building code changes. But right now, it's just not good enough. So we've fallen between some real interesting stools here, where if you look at indoor environments, there really is the carrot and the stick methodology. The stick being the lowest common denominator, which is basically building code. How can I build the cheapest possible house or the cheapest possible office or building that meets code and gets compliance, but maximizes my return on investment or my profitability as a building developer or an architect? Then there's the carrot side of things, which is how do I build the absolute shining example of efficiency and sustainability so that I can make the news and I can attract all of these higher rentals and wear the ribbon proudly and show that I am being a pillar of society by doing this. But there's no real middle ground. Anyone going, hey, I'm just going to do this because it's the right thing to do. Either you want to shine the light and be seen as someone leading the way because that helps you from a marketing or from a political perspective, or you're trying to maximize your revenue stream and therefore you're following the lowest common denominator, which is the building code. Really what you need to do is you need to improve the lowest common denominator, get the minimum that people need to do up to spec, but then also show that the carrot is not just for those that want to beat their chest and wave flags, but it's something that's actually going to provide a benefit to those occupants that you have. So rather than just wanting to be on the front page of the newspaper, I think getting those the return on investment in terms of happiness of employees or children or principals or people living in houses, whether that's efficiency, cost, money saved in terms of having to drive the cost of running that building. Whether it's stabilization with environmental qualities, whether it's calculations on carbon, all of these things can be used to improve the sales process around building just a high performing building rather than wanting to put the plaque on the wall.
If you think about it in the way most people would think about it, is slap in a few air conditioners and we're good to go, aren't we?
No, definitely not. Air conditioners just reticulates air, so they're not really removing any of the CO2 or anything. What we really need is a proper ventilation system, and balanced heat recovery, I guess, is the way to go. Air conditioners can put air filtration systems in, so you can have, if you're talking about COVID specifically or any type of particulate matter that you're dealing with, if you've got respiratory issues, you can put filtration systems within air conditioners, or you can have air purifiers, but they don't scrub CO2. They don't actually bring fresh air in. So you're still going to have the nitty-noddy stuff going on, whether it's in conference rooms or classrooms or in any work situation. You actually need to bring fresh air in, purify that fresh air if the fresh air requires purification, and that's obviously needs to be determined as well. If the air outside is fresh, if you're living in a beautiful small town in New Zealand and you've got the best air around, then you don't have to spend tons of money on expensive air purification systems. It just doesn't make any sense. Just bring the fresh air in, make sure that you've got some form of heat recovery so that you're not having to expend a ridiculous amount of money trying to heat the building in winter, and you should be good to go. Of course, if you're dealing in a COVID world and you're wanting to purify the internal air from a COVID perspective, then you can look at air purification systems and what they look like. But heat pumps are not the be all and end all at all. They're there to heat and cool air, and that's about it.
There's a prevalence now in New Zealand for heat pumps, air conditioners, because of the healthy home standards. So more people than ever before, in fact, almost everybody, will have an air conditioning of some sort in their home. Do you think with summer coming along, people might be tempted to close up all the doors, turn the air conditioning on, whereas, in previous summers, they may have opened a window?
Absolutely. Without a shadow of a doubt, providing the energy hardship doesn't kick in, because we do have an issue with energy hardship in this country as well. So there will be a large percentage of the population who can't afford to turn the heat pumps on. This is a known problem that we have with the healthy home standards, installing very expensive heat pumps with the inability to actually afford to pay for them. But that being said, those that can afford to will. I mean, because of the way that our buildings are built currently to code, the overheating problem is going to be as big as the cold, damp problem in the next 10 years, for sure. Especially when we're looking at climate change and we're looking at longer, hotter days. We haven't built our buildings for climate control, right? We've built our buildings to basically be just these open sieves that allow anything to come in and out. So without the air tightness required to actually control our indoor environment, we end up being at the mercy of our external environment. And what we've seen with the healthy home standards come in is we've beefed up our insulation without our ability to really deal with the air side of things, the cooling and the heating efficiently. And now that we've got massive amounts of insulation, you'll end up with huge amounts of solar gain from windows that especially aren't double glazed or have low E tints or something, huge amounts of internal heating within the buildings, and you're going to end up with occupants that are suffering as they can't cool the houses down. And as soon as you have a heat pump, you have no choice. It's either that or get into a cold bath or a cold shower. But I'm an example of this. I live in a rental, and right now, today, we're moving into summer. My house is scorching, absolutely scorching. And I live on 2 stories, a 3-bedroom house, 2 stories, and I only have a heat pump in my lounge, which is on the bottom floor. And the 3 bedrooms upstairs get absolutely scorching at night. And I only get relief around 9:30 p.m. when the sun starts to go down and gets a bit cooler. Other than that, I have permanent fans blowing on my face. the whole
And
time.
it'll change as summer goes on because it gets, it stays lighter longer. What tips do you have for improving indoor air quality? Obviously, we know about open a window, but what else can you do?
Well, mainly there's only one other thing other than opening windows or creating some form of ventilation. So windows are ventilation. It's a ventilation means, right? So what we really need is ventilation, and ventilation can come in a number of different capacities. So you can open a window, you can use some form of extraction system as well, extractor fans, or ventilation systems that come in either positive or negatively pressured, or balance pressured as well, depending on what you have. There is air purifiers. So air purifiers are now have gone gangbusters since COVID. Different types of air purifiers, I guess, have different types of strengths. So depending on what you determine to be clean and how clean you want it to be, that will then determine what sort of air purification system you want and how to spec it. You also need an air purifier that can move a certain amount of cubic meters of air per minute in order to actually cover a certain amount of square meterage. So it's not unfortunately a one size fits all, but it all comes down to ventilation. Ventilation is the key to clean air, and good ventilation is what you need. So if you have bad air outside, if you're in Taiwan, or India or something, Delhi, and you've got real huge problems with outdoor pollution, then of course you can't trust opening a window. You actually need to bring air in, but you need to purify the air as you bring it in. So you need an infiltration and exfiltration system with air purification in the middle of it to trap all of the smog and the particulates and the bacteria and viruses and what have you. But it's all about moving air, and the science is just understanding when to move it, how to move it, and what to do while you're moving it.
In some countries, I've noticed houses when you go into them, and Africa being one of them, is there's this little grate at the top of the wall in most houses or most rooms, quite close to the ceiling, that is actually a grate. So it's open to the outside. Depending on how thick the walls, it's a double layer of grating, but it's kind of a sort of small little air vent. Do you think these are practical, or are they just really window dressing? Could there be a potential solution to install some kind of grating or air venting in houses as a matter of course?
There's a lot of those solutions at the moment, and they're these things called passive smart vents, which actually work based on temperature. So they will passively open or close, no electronics whatsoever. It actually works on temperature and a metal alloy that reacts to the temperature. And depending on how cold it gets, when it gets really cold, the passive vent actually shuts itself off, so you're not bringing too much cold air in. When it starts to heat up, the metal becomes more malleable, and the vent then opens up automatically. So you don't have any wiring or anything. So these passive smart vents are quite pervasive around the world. In New Zealand, they're making an appearance as well. But it all comes down to design and what you are trying to achieve. There is a large part of dressing up when it's not designed in conjunction with the total building fabric, right? So you need to know what the building fabric is doing and how to best utilize that building fabric to your advantage. If you have an incredibly airtight building, one little vent is not going to make a difference. You actually need to have a proper ventilation system installed that can move enough air based on the occupancy. If you place a vent in the right place and it's big enough, then it could help depending on the design of the house and where the other vents are. You can't just have one vent. You probably need two or more vents so that you can have prevailing winds act as a way to draw in out. You're dealing with pressure differentiation, right? So if you have a negative pressure and a positive pressure inside, you want to be able to draw air in and out depending on how you deal with that. So there's a little bit of science that goes on with it. I think vents are great. They're inexpensive to run. They have large lifespans, but they need to be designed or inserted in conjunction with the building's design. You need to know why you're putting it in.
I think in terms of air ventilation and how we think, how we function, very often people will, as a matter of course, maybe find that they're feeling tired, they're low energy, it's difficult to think, all of these sorts of things. And very often the default may be to, well, I need to get some multivitamins, or I need to go to the doctor, there's something wrong with me. But it might actually be the air that they're breathing.
Look, it's a collection of a whole bunch of things. It's the air that we're breathing is just so unseen and unknown that we all forget about it. We all just go, well, that's what is. And if it's what is, then what can I do about it? How can I actually make a difference? And we're very reluctant to think about things that we can't actually do something about. We want to be able to do something about the things that we know about. So if the air is bad and there's nothing we can do about it, what can I do? I can't do anything. I might as well just not think about it. Otherwise, it gives you anxiety or whatever. So by bringing these things into the fore, you can take control back. It is one of those highly underrated changes that you can make to a building. Environmental quality, we're like frogs in boiling water, where you don't realize what good environmental quality is until you've actually been in a building that maximizes for it. And if you have, it's like a weight is lifted off your shoulders. You can just go, oh, wow, this feels amazing. Like I feel comfortable, like I can breathe easily, the air feels great. It's an awesome feeling. Like if you've ever been into a passive house, for example, or a passive building that's been built maximized for environmental quality, it is really a great feeling. Like it's something subconscious almost that you just go, oh, there's nothing I really have to worry about here. I can just go through and get on with my day, really.
In closing, a quick reminder, Tether is the first building performance insights platform that makes it easy to have full visibility of a building's operating efficiency and environmental impact through data-driven insights. If you are a landlord, property manager, or somebody who lives under a roof, you can find out more about Tether at www.tether.co.nz. This is me, Colin, saying thanks for joining us and goodbye.